Hello, welcome to episode 14 of the Spiritual Brainstorm. Today I'm going to talk about probably one of the most controversial topics. It's going to be my most controversial video, I guess. I'm going to be talking about unsung heroes. Basically, all of the people that we don't celebrate or don't take for granted, that we take for granted actually. In the spiritual realm, there's always this idea of people vibrating really high, raising your vibration, raising consciousness, star seeds, indigo children, everything is happy clappy. And then there is this idea of a dark side, which is the cabal, the ultra rich, the elite that are controlling this world, and plenty of different other, quote unquote, bad people. And the people that are vibrating low vibrations versus high vibrations. And here I'm going to try to sort of break these stereotypes and show that sometimes it's not at all what we think. So first of all, if you've watched several of my other videos, then you'll understand that basically what we are about to experience is transitioning from being just biological creatures to something bigger than biology. And you can think of this circle, first one, as being all possible experiences just within the laws of biology and linear time and 3D, whatever you want to call it. I don't really like this dimensions kind of thing, but who cares? Biology is a dimension in itself in terms of the rules and what you can experience. And so, once you pierce this bubble coming from the bubble of chemistry, you have the first living cell here. And then that splits into plenty of different experiences as a fractal of all the things that you can build from biology. And you have some dead ends, which is basically dinosaurs, let's say, which, if you just follow this logic of biology where evolution just builds more and more crazy biological features like huge fangs, or, bigger bigger shells to protect against the fangs. And then, that kind of game comes to an end with these nonsensical, huge creatures. And it's a nice experience. I mean, everybody fantasizes about dinosaurs. It's just that it's an experience that cannot break through to the next bubble. And what extends all the way to this bubble is humans. But we're not human yet. That is, humans are the bridge between biology and something higher. In the spiritual circles, we call this 5D. But again, I don't really like this this wording. I just think it's something beyond biology. And you could think of this as a sort of a global collective consciousness of all humanity, where all humans are one living cell. Just like we are an assemblage of living cells that form us. And so just imagine that we are heading towards this point, but at some points in the story, things can degenerate. So for instance, imagine that here we're in the 1930s. And since time doesn't exist, there are higher versions of yourself, what we call our higher selves, but which is just essentially another version of yourself in the future, which is much more evolved, that is looking at this situation from here. And they see, oh shit, humanity is about to discover nuclear power, nuclear energy, and they are forming two camps, capitalism and communism. And what's going to happen if they continue on that is just dead end. That is, they're going for a mass nuclear war and extinction. Um, Capitalism versus communism, hot war. What are we going to do? Okay. Let's think. Let's let's give them Hitler, this common enemy that both communism and capitalism is going to fight, which is going to create a sort of a cold war and not a hot war. And the use of nuclear weapons will be used, but minimal and only for testing. Hopefully, it'll work out. Okay. So everybody takes the example of Hitler as being the ultimate villain. The ultimate villain. But from another perspective, the soul that incarnated to play Hitler was probably the highest of all in terms of vibrations. It was probably it was probably Source itself that played the role of Hitler. Why? Because doing what he did, if you weren't a very, very, very high vibrational soul, you would accumulate so much karma in your life that basically it would screw you for all eternity. I mean, you'd have to repay that for billions of years. That is, karma, of course, is when it's just a question of balance. When you don't understand yet how the universe works and you bring in too much negative energy or too much positive energy, then the universe sort of balances you out in the next incarnation until you've learned a valuable lesson, and then you can move on. But understand that sometimes the worst people in all of humanity, because we don't have this multi-dimensional vision, we don't see what could have happened if Hitler had not existed. We don't see all of those possibilities that reach a dead end, and why this had to happen. And of course, if you look at what happened after 1945, it was the biggest and most unprecedented movement for peace. And the UN was created, and you can say all of that is imperfect, but still, the whole point of the universe is infinite experience. And infinite experience means whatever happens, you need to reach that point where humanity behaves like one global organism and understands all of these concepts of 5D or whatever. And the timing of reaching that point is essential. It cannot be reached from here, from the 10th century medieval ages. You just have aliens pop in and say, oh, by the way, you are multi-dimensional creatures, blah, 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 and fast forward. No, it's this. There's a gradual growth in consciousness, which allows for gaining more and more insight from the other bubble, from the other side, and get guidance and get information. But so even in the movies, for instance, even just imagine that life is a giant theater. Which roles are easiest to play? The roles of the villain or the roles of the hero? I mean, some of the actors that played the villains actually had the toughest time, and also the toughest time after the set. For instance, the guy that played the villain in Clockwork Orange, he never got a single role after that, well, barely, after playing the villain in Clockwork Orange. Because it's just stuck so much to him and his CV that it was hard for him to even find, a job related in the movies. So it's always the villain that is the hardest to play. And so by the same token, when souls incarnate, you have to understand that sometimes the worst people are actually the souls that vibrate the highest, because they're the only ones that will not get caught into karma once they die and they sort of wake up from this and say, wow, I was kind of a dick, but from a multidimensional perspective, I just saved all of their asses, and then they can just go back to whatever 12th dimension they came from without, being in this stuck in this karma loop of, repentance and feeling ashamed for what one has done and so forth. Um, and so what's happening to us now is, so you have the story of humanity, and then what are these multidimensional beings observing? Oh no, they're so materialistic, they're into mainstream science, and they don't understand that they're going to suffocate in their own excrements and pollution, in what else? In overexploitation of resources, blah 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 blah. What are we gonna do? Okay, how about we start feeding information about all of this 5D things, disclosure, you're not alone in the universe, these quantum understandings of reality where it's the observer that creates the reality, all of the spiritual awakenings. That's part of the process. That's part of the plan. And also, what we're also going to do is we're going to put the worst leaders in there, like, for instance, Trump, that doesn't give a crap about the environment. There's a very, I mean, it's the worst caricature you can think of a politician. And Boris Johnson in the UK, which is just like, I don't even know how someone like that can become a political leader. But understand that from a multidimensional perspective, it is the best way to, all of these people are actually the highest vibrational beings again, because they incarnate in order to sort of shove humanity onto a path that gets to 5D by simply being such a caricature for leaders that people turn away from them and say, okay, basically they incarnate to show people what you don't want in order for you to be sure of what you do want. So it's almost as if they said, okay, let's become caricatures of the worst possible, materialistic and cynical humans, and that will set humanity on a path where, because they see what they don't want, they are more inclined to go for what they do want. And so it's basically to kick us off of this apathy where we're just like, we're letting this all flow and see what happens, and the world just chugs along. No. We need to make a conscious choice and decision. We don't want to go the materialist route and this very cynical route of just exploit nature. Who cares? Blah blah blah. But again, these are the unsung heroes. From a multidimensional perspective, they sort of force humanity onto a certain path. And now, the saddest part is, so these multidimensional beings, they see that, humanity is just not conscious enough to make a choice if they're not forced to. And the second tragedy is that there is, even by incarnating into these beings, while their goal is to make sure that we steer towards what we do want, what we do is we waste time opposing them. So we go to protests and we march for the climate, and this Greta Thunberg, for instance, which is fighting for the environment. I like the idea, and she's got some things going for her, and this young generation has some things going for them. But the problem is, and people understand this in esoteric circles and spiritual circles, whatever you resist persists. which means the idea was never for us to give these people more attention and to start fighting them and opposing them. The idea was to just focus on what we do want and take it and steer in that direction without just at some point just ignoring them and saying, okay, this is the way to go, and thank you for showing us where we don't want to go, which allows us to go where we do want to go. Um, so so yeah, I mean, the evil cabal, for instance, what is their role? Well, basically, if humanity wasn't so scared about an evil elite controlling them and taking away their freedom, then they would not be so how should I say? Would not be so attached to the idea of freedom and going on this path right here. We would stay on this path right here, which is a dead end also, where basically we never awaken spiritually and seeking this kind of freedom from this evil, quote unquote, that we placed there specifically for our awakening. Because apparently that is the only way that humanity could awaken, is in one sense it's through fear. Through fear, your route of escape is spiritual awakening. So you fear so much for your life, so much for being controlled, that at some point it snaps in you, and the only way that you can get out of that is via spiritual awakening. It's kind of sad that humanity is at that low level of consciousness that we still need for souls to incarnate into plenty of evil scarecrows to steer us in the right direction. But that's just the fact of where we are in terms of the collective consciousness of humanity and the way we are. So what I'm saying here is that should we celebrate then Hitler, Trump, and Johnson? Absolutely not. And this is probably the hardest part to assimilate, is that from one point of view, which is the multidimensional point of view and the spiritual point of view, the Hitlers and the Trumps are actually heroes and saviors because they steered the collective story and experience of humanity towards this moment of transcendence where we're no longer biological creatures, but we're much more. And of course, you would need the multidimensional vision to understand that that's where it's going. And on top of it, I have no way to prove it because, of course, we don't have parallel universes where we could test what would happen with or without a Hitler. Here, I'm just speculating based on my own spiritual awakening and the information that I get. But so the idea is not to now, in our human experience, to celebrate them from a human 3D point of view. They are the most horrible. They are the most terrible. They are, all the evil and all that is real in 3D. And at the same time, they are our saviors and they are the biggest heroes of all time, courageous souls that played the worst of all the roles in order to steer this story in the right direction. And those two are fully compatible, and you need to integrate those two dimensions and visions in order for you to be fully spiritually awakened. To understand that there is a human perspective which may oppose a more higher dimensional perspective, and yet both are valid and both are quote unquote true. And so basically, in your 3D experience, just understand what they were there for, what these are there for as well, and just say a sort of a thank you for steering us in the right direction without necessarily throwing them any flowers or saying that what they're doing is great. But understand that they're just there to push us towards what we want. And to give you another example, for instance, Did we transition from horse carts to cars by massive protests, by fighting horse cart drivers and forming anti horse carts parties and going to the UN to denounce the horse carts and the treatment of horses? Or did we just decide to buy cars and the hell with horse carts? And within 20 to 30 years, a transition that was seamless happened between horse carts and cars. And so, by focusing too much on what you don't want and mounting up political parties to dismantle the cabal and whatever the horse carts cabal, because they are suppressing the cars technology and free cars for all. I'm referring here to free energy. Instead of doing that, just focus on what you want and go and take it. The only thing that is in your way is your own beliefs, and that is probably what star seeds are really here to do. Is they should understand this whole process, and as I'm explaining now, and they should be able to influence humanity, the Gretas and all the people that are manifesting and protesting and resisting these people that are just there to show us where not to go, to show these people, you know what, just instead of going manifesting in the street, join me and let's create this ideal society that we want together. Put our heads together and build something instead of waiting for the leaders to change. Wow. So, it's like lobbying Hitler for please be nice, blah, 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 instead of just, moving beyond his evil and doing something good. You know what I mean? There is a time for fighting, of course, like we did with Hitler. We had to fight him. But there's a time for action, and this is the time for action today. Today is not the time to take up weapons and go fight the Trumps and the Johnsons. Today is the time to sort of say, okay, I see where we could head if we follow your vision of the world. We don't want to go there, and we're going to go somewhere else because we live in democracies now. We have more freedoms, regardless of what you think, and just build it. And these were the times to fight. Now is the time for action in another kind of way. So I hope this is clear. I hope you understand a little bit more this kind of illusion of darkness and evil, and at the same time the reality of it from one perspective and from another. So if you have any questions, happy to oblige, and see you in the next episode.